Kate Bradshaw graduated in 2003 with a BA in History and an honors degree. While a student at Westminster, Kate was a member of the women's volleyball and basketball teams and a very lonely, possibly the only member of the Westminster College Republicans Club. She is currently a member of the college's alumni board. Kate is the director of government affairs for a law firm of Holland and Hart. She assists firm clients with business concerns and issues before the Utah State Legislature, governor, state agencies, and local governments. For over a decade, Kate has been deeply involved in government and political relations, campaign strategy, PAC funding, and media relations. Kate and her husband, Michael O'Connor, and super dog Ollie reside in their hometown of Bountiful, Utah. When not engaged in political pursuits, Kate would most like to be on the mountain trail, either on foot or skis, and preferably without cell service. Kate Bradshaw.
Thank you. It's great to be back on Westminster's campus for reunion weekend. When the invitation came to join the Westminster Thinks Big panel, and I thought about what it was I could share with you tonight, I decided I wanted to talk about one of my favorite political projects of all time that involved Westminster College. I'm often asked how it is that I came to develop an interest in policy and politics. And when I answer that question, I often point to the one person that I blame for catching the political bug and for inspiring a belief that I can engage in the political process and make the change I want to see in the world. That person is President Ronald Reagan. As a child, I generated countless why and how come questions, and when my parents, brilliant parenting by the way, got tired of those why and how come questions, they often suggested that I should write to the president and ask him why or how come. As a child growing up in the 1980s, the decade provided limitless opportunities to question and ask why, and I wrote to the president about the issues that shaped the decade, from the Challenger space shuttle disaster to the AIDS epidemic, the fall of the Iron Curtain, and one very important to me letter about potential school uniforms and their impact on my life. The awesome thing about this was the president wrote me back. It was very impactful for a young child to think that I could send off my letters filled with all my earnest thoughts and questions, and that they would be responded to. The president wrote me back. I never doubted that I could or should engage in the public policy debate and the dialogue, because for me that debate and dialogue started at such an early age. It wouldn't be until much later in life, when I was a senior here at Westminster College, that I realized the president might not have personally authored those letters in my scrapbook. As a congressional intern in Washington, D.C., one of my many tasks was to answer the myriad of correspondence sent to my congressman, and I drafted many a thoughtful letter to boys and girls coming of age in a different decade before sending those off to the auto pen and out the door. I don't imagine that the presidential intern that drafted my letters thought he or she was inspiring a future lobbyist, or that even such a profession would be a good one for young Katie, but become one I did. You'll notice it took me a while to say what it is I actually do for a living. I'm a lobbyist, and I know you'll be shocked when I say that I've come to expect a wide variety of reactions when I say what it is I do, and that not all of them are positive, and that not all of them are even very nice. I get it. Lobbyists have an image problem, and the public has come to believe that in order to engage in the public process, it takes big money political donations, high-powered lobbyists with enormous expense accounts and insider relationships. I'm here to tell you that isn't necessarily the case. Most people believe that lobbying is actually a newer phenomenon in politics, but it's actually enumerated here in the First Amendment, which was ratified in 1791. Thank you, history degree. You can skip all those lesser rights and freedoms. The important part is actually here at the bottom. The right to petition your government for redress of grievances. I'm actually changing all my business cards to say that I'm a redresser of grievances rather than a lobbyist, because I think it says something a little classier about what it is I do. But really, you know, what is lobbying? You can see here from this definition, taken from state code, that anyone that communicates in any way about anything with a member of the executive or legislative branch is engaging in lobbying. Which likely means if you've signed a petition, sent an email about your concerns, or liked a political post on Facebook, you have lobbied, and I'm not the only one in the room who's done so. But here's the kicker. A lobbyist, by definition, contracts for economic consideration when in the practice of lobbying, and that triggers a whole host of things. Licensing, reporting, limitations, and this lobby badge that I'm now required to don and display in order to continue lobbying you about lobbying. But now that I have my scarlet letter on, we can continue. In all seriousness, a lobbyist is really three very important things. First, I'm an educator. There is no possible way that every elected official, whether full or part-time, can know everything about everything. My job is to help legislators and the governor understand the pros and cons, the nuances of each piece of legislation they're called upon to vote, and to make sure that they understand those things as they cast their vote. Number two, I'm an expert familiar with the process. Everybody knows that we have three branches of government and they have checks and balances. And if you grew up watching any PBS as a kid, you'll probably remember the skit, I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill, that describes the general process of how a bill becomes law. What the skit doesn't tell you is that each state and local jurisdiction, while following the same general process, is unique. In Utah, we have a 45-day calendar general session. That's calendar days, not working days. And in those 45 days, they have to balance a $14 billion state budget and consider over 1,000 bills that have been filed. And so Utah has developed some unique ways in which to go about doing that in 45 days. And my job is to effectively and efficiently help clients through that process. Number three, a lobbyist is a flexible thinker. Most people think of the law in terms of absolutes and immovables. But just because something is the law doesn't mean it's a good reason to keep it. If it's burdensome, if it's costly, if it addresses an outmoded style of living or an outdated way of doing business. All this brings me to what I really wanted to talk to you about tonight. My favorite and possibly proudest lobbying project undertaken on behalf of Westminster College. I have been a member of the Alumni Mentoring Program for the past few years. And if you aren't familiar with AMP, it's a program that pairs students with alumni that have the same major or interested in a similar career field. For the 2013-2014 school year, I was paired with sophomore student Trey Hansen. Trey and I share the same major, history, and an interest in politics. I made Trey the same offer I have made every past and future AMP student, and that is the opportunity to join me at the state capitol for an inside look at the process. Trey took advantage of this opportunity like no AMP student ever had. He decided to comb through the lists of bills, and then he self-selected and identified bills he wanted to track and follow through the process. And soon Trey was joining me at every possible opportunity at the Capitol to follow his bills and then to tag along on the issues I was working on behalf of clients. On one particular day, I watched as Trey approached a committee chairman who just so happened to be holding a minimum wage bill that Trey was interested in following. The chairman started to dismiss Trey and say the bill doesn't have enough votes to get out of committee. It's as simple as that. Trey pushed back and said, well, this is a very important public policy issue. Why would you deny it the chance to be heard if you're so sure it's going to die anyway? As I sat back and watched this, I thought, President Reagan would be proud of this kid. Here was a bright young student who absolutely believed in his ability to engage in the process, to ask questions, and expect a reply. It was awesome. Towards the end of the session, I introduced Trey to some legislative interns and explained the very important role these college students played, given Utah's relatively lean legislative staff and lightning-fast general session. Trey immediately knew he wanted to be a legislative intern next session. However, there was a little problem. Not just any student can apply to be part of the Utah Legislative Internship Program. You have to be a student at a school admitted to the program. And Westminster just so happened to be the only in-state four-year institution not admitted to the program. However, sometimes even lobbyists use their powers for good. And I had an eager young student willing to help put in some of the legwork. And we decided that we would undertake a lobbying project. We would transform our AMP pairing, turn it into a lobby project, a real-life lobby project, so that Trey and all future Westminster students would have the ability to see this process from the inside out. We had 7 months. And in order to get Trey through the process, for him to apply so that he could register to be an intern, we needed to do a handful of things in order to do that. We needed to receive all the internal approvals here at the college. We needed to find a faculty advisor for the internship. We needed to create a legislative prep course. And then we had to get the legislative part. Trey worked to shoot all of the internal traps on campus, while I focused on the legislative staffer who was assigned to oversee the program, and on the legislative management committee, made up of leadership from both sides of the aisle and both chambers of the state legislature. This committee had the power to add Westminster to the program. Ironically, our stiffest opposition didn't come from legislators, Westminster faculty, legislative staff. No, our stiffest opposition actually came from our fellow institutions of higher learning, who had come to feel that they were entitled to a certain number of these internship spots and didn't want Westminster students crowding in on their turf. So while Trey continued to work internally to make sure that we would be ready to apply, I lobbied each of the members of this legislative management committee and addressed the concerns to make sure no other institutions would lose spots and that Westminster could be added to the program and bring value to all of the students in the program. Finally, in the fall of 2014, we were ready to make our ask. We set up a meeting with Speaker Becky Lockhart, who chaired the Legislative Management Committee. Trey arrived prepared to explain to the Speaker all of the work that had been done and to assure her that a Westminster student would arrive fully prepared to serve. I described to her all the work we had been done to reassure the other schools that we weren't after their spots. As we left the meeting, the Speaker agreed to put us on the next committee agenda. And a month later, the issue was voted on. We were approved unanimously and added to the program. Trey became the first official Westminster legislative intern earlier this year during the 2015 legislative session. He interned for House Majority Assistant Whip Representative Brad Wilson from Kaysville, and he received rave reviews, not just for his work product, but for his work ethic. I enjoyed checking in with Trey each day at the Capitol as he consumed every moment of this opportunity to view government from the inside. Trey is now in his senior year at Westminster. He's working on his history thesis and anticipating graduation later this spring. I'm afraid, though, it probably won't be long before we see Trey in a different capacity as a campaign manager, a political staffer, an elected official, or maybe even a lobbyist. Here at Westminster, students are trained to think critically, to be leaders, and to be great communicators. Here at Westminster, we believe in global learning initiatives like social consciousness, ethical awareness. And I think that if you embrace this story about lobbying, you will realize that all of you have the tools to lobby and to change the world to be what you want it to be. Everyone should feel that they can ask questions, engage in the dialogue, and expect answers. And that process leads to the change you want to see. Thank you.